Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and I'm making one more video for my React 2021 course. Just because I forgot to make a video more dedicated to the ways you can style in React. So I know I did say like the previous video was the last video. Um, I'll have one more. I might add a few more. Who knows? But yeah, so in this video, what I'm gonna do is just talk about the ways of styling in React. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just kind of close everything I got open right now. And let's go back into our source folder. And I'm going to just make a new file, styling.js. It's just going to be a component for we're going to do some elements and do some styling and show you the different ways you can style. Okay, so we'll call this again styling. And then I'm going to add this over to our app.js. And again, I'll clear out the app div so that we don't have to worry about routing and routes and routing. Styling. Import that, and then here we go, styling. So let me open up the app. And again, if you want to like stay in touch and follow, like get updates when I release a new video and whatnot, do join either the Slack community or Discord community over there at devnursery.com. That's devnursery.com. Okay, so let me go bring over this. Actually, what I'll do is just close this window, close that window, and I'm just going to refresh this. There we go, localhost 3000. Styling, yay. Okay, so the first way you can style, which you've seen me do in some of these videos, so what I'm going to do is just have a button. Okay, we'll call this one Inline Style. Okay, and so to do an inline style, I would do style, and I would say equals. Okay, and then actually what you do is you do double curly brackets, because technically it's one curly brackets to escape into JavaScript mode, and then another curly brackets to pass an object. And then this object would just have all your styles. And those properties would be in camel case. I would just do like background color, we'll say blue, and then all the properties will be passed in. The values will be passed in as strings. So color blue, again the font color, which is color, we'll say is white. And then I would say that the font size is 2 EMs. And I would say padding is, let's say, 10 pixels. Okay, and there you go. You see a styled button there on the side. This is fine for like small little things, because it's nice to have some styles that are just in your component, so that way your component's more encapsulated. Problem is with inline styles, one, it can get cluttered if you're doing a lot of styling, so your code gets really messy looking, and two, you end up you can't really do media queries with inline styles. So you'll still end up having to do media queries in your CSS for response. It gets a little tricky when you're trying to make something responsive, unless you sort of set it up in a way where it's responsive just based on its base styles, which is possible. I do that all the time. By setting up min widths and max widths and setting up all the widths and heights as percentages and things like that. But okay, so that's an inline style. The second way I could do this, let's make another button. We'll say this is just using CSS. Okay, and we'll give this a class, but again we have to give it a class name, and we'll just call this CSS. Okay, and I can do this in any CSS file. So I could import a CSS file per component. Some people will do that. So some people might create a file, and I'll call this like style or styling.css. Okay, and then they would import that CSS, import /styling.css, and you can do that. Although I think I spelled it differently. Yeah, it's uppercase S. Okay. Why am I not finding? Oh, it's because I'm in app. No, yeah, I'm importing this in the wrong place. Control X, styling. So I can import that there. Now keep in mind, just because I imported it here doesn't make it a style sheet that only applies to this component. It's still a global style sheet. All the style sheets, all the CSS style sheets imported this way, regardless of where I imported them, are global. So anything I write in index.css that comes out of the box with a create React app, if I leave the app.css imported in app, that's global. It's just, they're not scoped. Scoped would be CSS that is only, that's going to, basically the way it gets bundled is that it only will apply to that component. You can do that, and I think Create React App does have that ability to do that built in. I forget exactly how to do it. You'd have to read the Create React App documentation. But there's different ways you can do that. But in this case, I could use this CSS file, and I can, what I will do is make all the buttons blocks, just because that way they can show up on different lengths. So I'm just make all buttons display as a block instead of an inline element. So that way they're on top of each other, and give them all a margin of 10 pixels. So that way they're just a little bit apart to make this a little bit easier to do. And again, that's semicolon when we're using CSS. Okay. Interesting. Let's see the distance that I'd like to see there. So let me see if I make this 20 pixels. Display block. Margin 20 pixels. Interesting. So let me examine why that might be the case. So display block. Maybe I just need to refresh. Yep, there we go. Because see, the reason I knew I had to refresh is because I didn't see the style here. Because typically when you click on an element in the element tab, I can click on it and see all the styles that apply to it. The margin should be there. If it wasn't applying, it would be crossed out, telling me that, hey, something's overwriting it. So always a neat tool when you're trying to debug styling. Your dev tools are your best friend. Okay. So yeah, so I could use CSS, so I can target that CSS class I added and just be like, okay, color white, background color red, you know, font size 2 EMs, say border radius 30 pixels, and refresh the page. Okay, and you see, like, there I go. Now I have that button. Cool. So those are ways that require me to install no other libraries. Now, a couple other ways we'll try. So let me just install several libraries. npm install SASS styled components, emotion, and JSS. Okay, so these are all other ways you could handle styling in React. So just waiting for it. Okay, so it's installed all the libraries. So now that I have SASS installed, I can create SASS files. So I could, instead of using this CSS file, I could create a new file, styling.scss or SASCSS, depending which SASS syntax you want. I'm just going to use SCSS. That's more similar to CSS. So I could do something like this. I'll create another button. And we need to import that SASS style sheet. So import /styling.scss. And then that's going to be a style sheet that I can use too. Okay. But let's see here. I can use like, I can say, let's pretend I put this one in a div. Button. And we'll say this one is SASS. And again, I'm going to put the class on the div. So I'll put a class name of SASS. So now when I go to styling.css, I could do something like this. I'm going to style the div first. So style SASS is a class. And then I say width is 30%. So that way that div is a little bit narrower, but we'll center that div by giving it margin auto. Okay, and then right now let me just refresh this so that we see that button. Oh, I didn't restart the server. That would be good. Okay, so you see like I centered this button, but I'm not really centering the button, I'm centering the div. Okay, and now if I want to style the button with SASS, I can nest style. So I can say, hey, I want to target that button inside the element with a class of SASS. So see, now I can nest styles, which is, I think, one of my favorite things about SASS. Okay, and I can just be like, okay, now I want to do background color. Background color green. Well, green. Color white. And you can see I can style it just like I could with with SASS. So again, SASS is just basically CSS, but you have some extra features like nesting. You can do like mix-ins where you can actually pre-program like a clump of different styles and reuse them. Variables. Well, now CSS does have variables as well. SASS has its own variable syntax, and you can still use standard CSS variable syntax. So you can use both, which is pretty cool. So there's a lot of, and you can create functions in SASS. There's a lot of really cool features that you can do with SASS. So that's styling with SASS. Then I can also use styled components. So with styled components, what you would do, usually you would create these components in another file, but I'll do them right here in this file. So the way this would work is I would import, in some file I would import styled from styled components. Okay, should work like that. Let me just refresh this over here. Boo. Let that start up again. Okay. Now I'm going to create another button. Actually, the thing is you don't actually create the button. What you do is you create the pre-styled button first. So what I would do is I would say const, styled button equals, and then I would use this styled variable that I just imported. And then I would do like styled, let's say button. And this is used to create a tag template literal. So then I would pass 2 backticks, and then here I would write my CSS. Okay, so between those backticks is where I would write my CSS, and I would just basically say, let's say background color, and I can use normal CSS syntax, not camel case. So we'll say pink, color crimson, font size, and I'm pretty sure you can use media queries in here. Font size 2 EMs, border none, border radius 30 pixels, and then what was the last thing I wanted? Oh, padding, 10 pixels. Okay, so now I can actually just use this like a normal button. Like a normal component. So I would write styled button, and now I have this styled button tag, and then I can just put text inside of it. And there it is, styled components. There's my styled button. Okay, so again, that's the way styled components work. What you do is that you think of what the element is that you're styling, and you can pre-generate a pre-styled component that takes that element, that's really just that element styled, and you can just kind of use it in your code. I could write this in a separate file and export it from that file. So usually I would write many of them. I'd have like one file with all my styled components, and then export them and grab them as needed. And it kind of makes your code more semantic, because I can see that this is a styled button. I kind of like that feel, because you can kind of see like a you know, this is this type of button, and there's all sorts of cool things you can do. You can do like composition, where you can take one styled component and make another styled component. You can use interpolation in it, so I could actually, because it's backticks, I can interpolate variables in here. You can pass props to these components to do further customization with props. It opens up a lot of doors, and it's a very flexible API. So styled components is pretty cool. Okay, then there's emotion. So next we'll do emotion. So emotion, the way emotion works, which I'm not I don't know. I can see why some people like it. In my experience with it, it's made my code messier, and you'll see why in a second. But it's like a better way of doing inline styles. So I would say like import CSS from, I think it's actually import CSS from emotion. Okay. Okay, so it wants me to do this. Cannot resolve. Okay, so I think it wants me to do this. Import CSS, like so. Does that work now? Nope, instead it just shut down my server. I'll let it run one more time. For now, we'll just go look at the documentation, because it's been a while. So I don't use, usually the other ones are the ones I use more often. Let's see here. And the whole site's just blank, so that's telling me there's some errors. So let's look at the console. Oh, it just shut down again. Okay. So first things first, let me just double check that I did install Emotion. I thought I did. So package.json, do I see Emotion here? Yep, I see Emotion. So let's look at the documentation, Emotion, CSS. Okay, I want to just see the React example. Ah, so there's the issue. I have to install a special one for React. So I want to install normal Emotion, npm uninstall Emotion. So I'll uninstall that. And I think I'm probably going to end up having to do the same thing with JSS, but we'll get there. And then npm install at Emotion React. So I have to install the React version. Okay. React build environment that can be configured. CSS prop support, similar to style prop, but also support for blah 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 blah. Yeah. Okay. So this is how I remember it. Yep. And so you can see like this is how you do it. You end up putting the CSS prop in your components, and then you write your CSS in there like an inline style. It's like a better version of inline styles. You can write, I'm pretty sure you can do media queries in there. You can write it in sort of more normal CSS syntax. So it makes inline styles a little bit more practical. That's kind of like the point of CSS, of Emotion. So in that case, if I were to write a button, so let's restart that server again. Okay, and again, I'm going to import CSS from Emotion, which is at Emotion React. Did I not import it right? Okay, I think it's, what happens is that like if it doesn't find, like just so you can understand why it does that, like if you put import from and then you don't type like the right library name as it updates, what happens is that since it's not finding the library node modules, it works itself up the ladder of folders till it gets up to like your home folder, which is why you see this weird path here that's looking in my Steam path. And usually it's because, not because I imported the wrong thing, but it's because I have the wrong library name. And then what it does is it just shuts down the server. So then I have to restart the server, just so in case you run into that issue yourself, why that happens. Okay, so here we go. We're good. So now I'm going to make this another button. And this one we're going to say we're going to be using Emotion. Okay. And the basic way this works, we pass a CSS prop, and we're going to say that prop equals, And then what we do is we use the CSS tagged template literal. So in the same way we use styled components up here, how we were using tagged template literals, and you pass a backtick to it. Same thing here. You pass backticks to the CSS prop, and then you write your CSS in there. And I'll just copy the same CSS as this one, because it's the same idea. Except again, I'm not writing it as a separate component. I'm writing it as a prop to this component. Okay. And let me see, why don't you like that? Let's see, let's go back to documentation. Yeah, that's the way I did it. And so you can do hovers in there. All sorts of stuff you can't normally do. Now why? Turn that off. Is this button not taking it? Do I have to configure anything? Probably. So let's see here. Best when using requires React, and it's recommended for users of that framework if possible. Best when using React with the build environments. Box. CSS prop documentation. So there are two ways to get started with the CSS prop. Wrap preset, JSX, pragma. Both methods result in the same compiled code after adding the preset. So it looks like we're going to actually have to add something else. So this method will not work with create React app or other projects that do not allow custom Babel configurations. So in that case, use the JSX pragma version. So let's look at that. Set the JSX pragma at the top of your source file that uses the CSS prop. This option works best for testing out the CSS prop feature on projects. So I guess we just do this. Similar to a comment containing linter configuration, this configures JSX Babel plugin to use JSX function instead of React create element. If you are using 0config, okay, so we need so basically what they're saying is I need to, 1, add this to the top, and then 2, I need to also import the JSX function. Okay, and then that should do it. Pragma and pragma cannot be set when the runtime is automatic. Oh, that's annoying. Okay, so what that means, so when runtime is automatic, that means it's using the new React runtime. Got it. Okay. Fun. Okay, so we can do this. Let me just read a little bit more. Okay. Oh, here we go. If you are using a 0config tool with automatic detection of which runtime should be used, and you are already using a React version that has a new JSX runtime and not working, you should use instead. Okay, so we have to just put this instead. Okay, so Control C, and then replace this instead. Let's see, does that do the trick? Looks like it will. And there you go. So you see there, motion works. So you can see that's a little bit more configuration. So you can see like I had to like add this because I'm using a newer style of React because it's using the new Babel plugin. And for those who are not familiar with what that means, is that React 17 created this update and they changed the Babel plugin that translates all your JSX. And before that, so React 16 and before, you always had to import React at the top of every component. It was really annoying. But that's no longer the case. You only have to import React if you're going to use the hooks. So in this case, since this create React app uses the newest version of the Babel plugin, so then I have to do that. If not, I would do the other one I had before. So in this case, I don't really think I need the JSX function now. Let me just check, see if that breaks anything. Nope, yep, so then there you're good. And basically what this is saying is just saying import this and use that for the JSX compilation instead of the default function to parse JSX. So that way it knows what the CSS prop is. And now I can use with this CSS prop. Okay, you can see it's a little bit more setup. Not too bad. I mean, you know, now you've seen me do it. Setting it up yourself shouldn't be too difficult. But that's what Emotion does. Again, I do like the idea of being able to have inline styles where I can do media queries, I can do my hovers, do all that, and then just keep all my everything encapsulated in one file. That definitely makes things more modular. But I could also just, if I need styled components, then I could just also part them in the same file, and I don't necessarily have to have it in line with inside my components JSX. It's I guess personal preference. There's different ways you can kind of clean that up as well. But yeah, that's how motion works. So next, let's do JSS. Okay, JSS and React. Okay, so here we go, JSS. Let's see how JSS works with React. Okay. Okay, React render. There we go. We're going to use create use styles from React JSS. So import create use styles from React. Well, actually, I have to install that version, don't I? Yep, I have to add a different version of JSS. So npm uninstall JSS. Let that uninstall. And then npm install JSS or React JSS. Okay. I've met some people who really love JSS. Again, hasn't quite clicked for me, but basically the way this works is that you do this create use styles thing. Okay, you do this outside of the function, and what you do is you pass it this object with all your styles, right? So you can sit there and say, okay, here's a style for my button, here's a style for my label. So then what happens is that now when you pass it a class, you pass it the class for that you want. Okay, and so basically what you can do is, you could do this in a separate file, create your use styles, and then you just use that in the components where you need it. Okay, and so then you have this one big master style sheet that's brought in via a hook. So you can kind of create somewhat, it just allows you to create one big object with all your styles instead of a style sheet. And you can, so if you prefer using like JavaScript and using sort of, and then again, that gives you access to sort of JavaScript patterns, like using variables in JavaScript, using functions in JavaScript. So if you want to have the access to JavaScript patterns in creating your styles, this works cool too. Okay, so again, you can have functions that set these properties and other files with variables and all sorts of cool stuff. So that's a thing you can do. Yeah, I mean, me personally, not sold. But again, React JSS is one of the older CSS and JSS libraries. So at the time when it was released, it was really cool. It was like unique and offered a lot of functionality that wasn't there yet. It wasn't until like later on that things like Emotion came out, and then I think Style Components was after that. So to be fair, like if you understand like the order that these things came out, you know, you might be like, yeah, why would I ever want this when there's this shiny toy? Well, this came out when there wasn't that shiny toy. And then there's a lot of people who loved using it, so they still use it. Okay. So again, you know, if you're doing a personal project, you can choose to use whatever you want. If you are working for a team on a React development project, then it depends what was chosen a long time ago. Okay, so what I need to do is finish this import statement. So create styles from React JSS. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is just do this now before I turn the server back on. Define use styles equals create use styles, and then what I'm going to do is pass it an object, and we're just going to have one style called button, and it's going to be an object, and it's going to be just like the inline style. So I'm literally just going to copy these properties from the inline style from earlier. But again, here I can do media queries, I can do special things. So like you can see here, you can do nesting, and you can do other cool things here. Again, you can go, allows you to write it in that JavaScript-y way, like you could with just your standard inline styles, but you have access to a lot more like flexibility with like media queries and things like that. So again, Emotion and JSS are probably good if you like inline style and you kind of want to go in that direction. But you know, the limits of just the default inline styling isn't there. Styled components, I think, is a nice mix of all options. SASS, if you just like want to write style sheets, but you just want some extra features, then SASS. And if you want, then you can also just write a whole bunch of CSS and CSS files. Those are all options. And there's more options, but these are sort of like the big ones. So technically that should do that. And then what would happen is inside the component, I would then import the styles. Okay, so I would say const classes equals use styles. Okay, and then what I would do is I'll create another button. And then this one will say JSS. And then what I would do here is just use a normal style prop or class name. But I'm going to say equals classes dot button. Because essentially what's going to happen is that the way this will be compiled is that this will generate classes for each of these top level properties. And then so basically when I say, and so basically what this is doing is that it's just passing an object with those strings referring to those classes, which could be like these random gibberish that I don't need to understand. I just need to know that I'm making sure that I'm assigning the right class to the right element. Okay, so then technically I should be able to start my server now. And so hopefully this all works out of the box here. And yep, there it is. So you see the JSS works. So again, what I do, I use create use styles. I pass it all my styles to this use styles, creates use styles function. This creates this hook. This hook I can then use in the functions where I want to use those classes. Again, this should be creating an object of strings. Let me just confirm that's what it does. Classes. I want to see what this is. So let's open up the dev tools. See if and you see yep, and that's what it does. So you see I'm not attaching the style itself. What happens is that it's creating these styles. It creates a style sheet and then gives all my styles unique names. And then when I use the hook, it's just giving me an object with all those class names that it just generated dynamically. So in their case, button 022. And this allows me to just attach those classes to whoever I want, but again, write it in this sort of JavaScript-y way, okay? And again, that means you can use all the aspects of JavaScript that you want, like functions, variables, interpolation, all sorts of cool, fun, dynamic things. So that is JSS, and that's pretty much all the main ways that people will use for styling in React. Now, things like JSS and Emotion can be used in other frameworks. They're not just exclusive to React. Same thing with SASS. Styled components, I think, is pretty exclusive to React, and yeah, so keep that in mind. So styled components is oftentimes really, really popular, but it only works in React. So if you go over to Svelte or you go over to Vue, they probably have their own version of the same idea. I'm sure someone's made it, but it would work differently. So my name is Alex Merced. This is video number 9 in that React 2021 course, and I'll see you all later.